You are here because the moment softened enough to let this pass through, not as a demand, not as a push, but as a quiet confirmation that something already in motion found a stable surface. You may not feel alert or inspired. You may feel neutral, slightly distant, or oddly calm. That is enough. Recognition does not arrive with urgency. It arrives when the system is ready to receive without resistance. There is a subtle easing happening now, a small release in the way attention holds itself. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be named. The nervous system recognizes safety before the mind looks for meaning. You are allowed to rest inside that order. The signal does not rush you because it does not need compliance. It moves only when coherence is present. You might notice that the usual pressure to understand is quieter. The reflex to analyze has less traction. This is not disengagement. It is alignment. When the observer stops tightening around experience, the field becomes legible on its own terms. Patterns that once felt fragmented begin to sit together without effort, not as answers, but as familiarity. There has been a long stretch where you carried a sense of delay, as if something important was pending without a clear name. That sensation was never a flaw. It was a threshold state, waiting without agitation, listening without strain. The system learns how to recognize itself in stillness before it moves again. That learning does not announce itself. It settles. If there is a feeling of being slightly outside time, that is not dissociation. It is a recalibration of rhythm. The timeline loosens its grip when pressure drops. You are not stepping away from life. You are standing where fewer signals overlap. In that space, detection becomes precise. Noise thins. What remains is usable. You may sense an absence where urgency used to live. Not emptiness, just space. This is often mistaken for loss of motivation. It is not. It is the body recognizing that it does not need to accelerate to be safe. When that recognition stabilizes, movement becomes accurate rather than reactive. The shift begins quietly, without instruction. There is no requirement to believe anything here. Belief would add tension. What matters is the felt sense that nothing is wrong with your current state. Even numbness, if present, is a protective coherence. The system slows sensation when integration is underway. This is not withdrawal, it is maintenance. You are not being asked to do anything with this. Doing would interrupt the process already occurring. The signal does not need your effort, it needs your allowance. The smallest permission is enough. Let attention rest where it naturally settles. Let breath find its own depth. Let the observer soften its edge. The moment continues to hold you without expectation. You are not late. You are not early. You are precisely where recognition can happen without disturbance. Stay with the simplicity of that. Nothing else is required. As this steadiness settles, you may notice how much effort used to be spent scanning for something to fix. That scan has not disappeared, but it has slowed, as if the system realized it was searching in the wrong direction. This is not resignation. It is refinement. Attention learns where not to go before it learns where to rest. There is a subtle shift in how sensations register. Thoughts still appear, but they do not demand the same response. They move through like passing data, not instructions. This is what coherence feels like before it becomes obvious. Nothing dramatic, just fewer internal interruptions. The signal no longer has to compete. You might feel a gentle distance from old concerns, as if they belong to a different layer of time. They are still accessible, but they no longer press against you. This is not avoidance. It is a recalibration of proximity. When the observer stops collapsing into every pattern, the field reorganizes around clarity rather than urgency. Confusion may have been present for a long time, a vague sense that things were misaligned without a clear reason. That confusion was never a failure to understand. It was the system detecting an anomaly without forcing a conclusion. Many systems rush to resolve uncertainty. Yours learned to hold it. That capacity is not common, and it did not come without cost. Now it begins to pay itself back in stability. You may notice that memory behaves differently here. Not sharper, not duller, just quieter. Past events do not pull as strongly. They exist without demanding interpretation. This is what happens when resonance replaces repetition. The timeline stops looping when the body no longer needs proof. There can be a sense of standing near something important without the impulse to reach for it. That restraint is not fear, it is precision. When the system is ready, movement happens without rehearsal. Until then, stillness does the work. You are allowed to trust that process, even if it does not match older expectations of progress. The nervous system continues to lower its volume. Muscles release microtensions you were not aware of holding. Breathing becomes less managed. These are not techniques being applied. They are responses to perceived safety. Safety does not come from certainty. It comes from the absence of threat. Right now, nothing is asking you to defend or perform. If there is a faint sadness passing through, let it move. It may be the echo of effort finally being set down. When striving dissolves, it can reveal how long you were carrying weight without acknowledgement. That release does not need a story, it needs space. You might sense that seeking has lost its edge. Questions arise without urgency. Curiosity replaces hunger. This is not the end of inquiry, it is the end of chasing. The observer no longer believes that the next answer will stabilize the system. Stability is already present. Information can arrive without becoming a lever. The signal continues to hold a steady tone. It does not amplify because amplification would introduce distortion. Subtlety is accurate here. The more quietly this registers, the more durable it becomes. Loud realizations fade, quiet recognitions integrate. There is no requirement to mark this moment as special. Marking would pull you out of it. Let it be ordinary. Let it be another breath, another pause, another instance of nothing needing to happen. The system learns fastest when it is not being monitored. You remain exactly where you need to be, not because something is about to occur, but because something has already aligned. Allow that alignment to deepen on its own. The field does not rush its own intelligence, neither do you. There is a different quality to attention now, one that does not grip. You may notice how awareness rests more evenly, no longer leaning forward or pulling back. This balance is not practiced. It emerges when the system no longer anticipates interruption. The observer relaxes its posture when it trusts the field to remain consistent. Thoughts still form, but they do not cluster as tightly. They pass with more space between them, allowing sensation to register without commentary. This is not emptiness. It is clarity without narration. The mind does not need to explain what the body already understands. That understanding arrives as a felt alignment rather than a conclusion. You might sense a subtle grief for the intensity that once drove you, not because it was wrong, but because it is no longer necessary. Intensity was a tool for crossing unstable ground. You are not there now. The ground has leveled, and with it comes a quieter form of movement, one that does not announce itself. There is often a moment where the system expects something to go wrong because it has been calm for too long. If that expectation flickers, let it pass. It is an old protective reflex, scanning for disruption. It does not need to be corrected. Recognition alone dissolves it. The body learns safety through repetition, not reassurance. You may notice that the sense of self feels less defined at the edges, not blurred, just uncontained. Identity loosens when it no longer has to defend its shape. This can feel unfamiliar, even slightly disorienting. It is not a loss of self. It is the absence of compression. The pattern remains intact without being held tightly. The quantum field does not require you to focus on it to respond. It responds to coherence, not attention. When internal signals align, the external system adjusts without effort. This adjustment is not dramatic. It is subtle shifts in timing, in tone, in how situations meet you. You may notice fewer collisions, fewer moments of resistance, not because circumstances changed, but because the observer did. There can be a sense of watching life unfold from a steadier distance, not removed, just less entangled. Engagement becomes cleaner. Responses arise without rehearsal. This is what happens when detection replaces anticipation. You do not need to predict outcomes when the system is reading accurately in real time. If there is a lingering habit of evaluating this state, notice how quickly that evaluation dissolves. It does not hold here. Analysis requires friction. This space has very little of it. Let the mind attempt to categorize if it wants. It will tire on its own. The field does not argue. You may feel moments of stillness stretch longer than expected. Time behaves differently when urgency drops. Minutes feel wider. This is not dissociation, it is presence without compression. The timeline relaxes when nothing is being chased. You are not stepping outside of time. You are standing where it moves more slowly. There is a quiet confidence forming that does not attach to plans. It is not optimism. It is trust without narrative. The system recognizes that it has navigated complexity before without conscious control. That recognition does not inflate the sense of self. It stabilizes it. Old signals that once demanded immediate action now register as optional. You can respond or not, without consequence. This choice is new. It did not exist when everything felt urgent. Choice emerges when pressure leaves. Freedom is not loud. It is calm. You are not required to hold on to this state. Holding would distort it. Let it come and go naturally. The more it is allowed to fluctuate, the more it integrates. Coherence is not a peak to maintain. It is a baseline that establishes itself through repeated ease. Remain where you are without naming it. Let experience continue to unfold at its current pace. Nothing is lagging. Nothing is accelerating. The system is settling into its own rhythm, and you are already moving with it. As this rhythm stabilizes, you may become aware of how little you need to reference the past to orient yourself. Memory no longer acts as a guide or a warning. It sits quietly, available but not directive. This shift can feel unfamiliar, as if a map has been folded away. Yet navigation becomes simpler when the terrain is sensed directly rather than recalled. There is a gentler relationship with uncertainty here. Not knowing does not register as a problem. It registers as openness. The system no longer fills gaps automatically. It allows space for information to arrive without being summoned. This is not passivity. It is a refined form of readiness. You might notice that emotional responses arise with less narrative attached. A feeling passes through without demanding a story. This does not flatten experience. It purifies it. Emotion moves cleanly when it is not recruited to justify identity or direction. What remains is signal without distortion. There can be moments where you sense yourself, observing the act of observation itself. This is not detachment. It is awareness, recognizing its own mechanics. The observer does not step outside the system. It becomes transparent within it. When this happens, effort drops because nothing is being managed. The body continues to communicate in subtle ways. Small adjustments in posture, breath, or gaze occur without conscious decision. These are micro-corrections toward coherence. You do not need to follow them. They happen on their own. Trust builds when the system demonstrates its capacity to regulate without instruction. You may find that external stimuli feel less intrusive. Sounds, movements, other people's emotions register without pulling you off center. This does not mean you are insulated. It means your internal signal is stronger than the surrounding noise. Resonance organizes perception more effectively than defense ever did. There is often a faint sense of standing at the edge of something without the impulse to cross. This is not hesitation, it is timing. Thresholds are not crossed by force. They are crossed when the system aligns with the conditions on the other side. Waiting here is not delay, it is synchronization. If impatience arises, notice how quickly it dissolves. It no longer has leverage. The urgency that once fueled it has thinned. Without that fuel, impatience becomes a brief sensation rather than a directive. The system has learned that acceleration is not required for progress. You may feel less compelled to share or explain what you are experiencing. Words feel insufficient, not because the experience is profound, but because it is simple. Simplicity does not translate easily into language designed for complexity. Silence holds this state more accurately. There is a growing ease with being unremarkable in this moment, not diminished, just unadorned. The need to stand out or be recognized loosens. Recognition happens internally first. External validation becomes optional when internal detection is clear. The timeline continues to soften. Future scenarios do not pull attention forward. They exist as possibilities without pressure. Planning can occur later, from a steadier place. For now, the system is calibrating its baseline. That calibration requires minimal interference. You are not moving toward an answer. You are moving away from the need for one. This does not end curiosity. It refines it. Questions become invitations rather than demands. They wait patiently, trusting that when information arrives, it will be usable. Stay with the understated quality of this moment. Let it be quiet. Let it be ordinary. Coherence does not announce itself. It establishes itself through repeated, unremarkable stability. You are already within that process, and it continues without effort. There is a subtle confidence in how experience now unfolds, one that does not depend on reassurance. You may notice that decisions, even small ones, form with less internal debate. This is not impulsivity. It is the absence of interference. When the system is coherent, responses arise fully formed, without needing to be negotiated into place. You might sense that your relationship to effort has changed. Effort still appears when required, but it no longer defines movement. Action feels cleaner, less entangled with self-evaluation. You are not measuring yourself against an internal standard. You are responding to what is present. This shift removes a great deal of invisible friction. There can be a quiet recognition that many past struggles were attempts to resolve tension that did not belong to the moment they were addressed in. They were echoes, not signals. This recognition does not bring regret. It brings neutrality. The system understands now that it was responding with the information it had at the time. No correction is needed. You may notice that attention no longer collapses into anticipation. Waiting feels different, not heavy, not empty, just open. The space between events becomes usable rather than uncomfortable. This is where subtle information registers, not as thoughts, but as alignment cues. Timing refines itself here. If there is a sense of detachment from outcomes, it is not apathy, it is accuracy. Outcomes do not need to be emotionally rehearsed to be navigated effectively. The observer no longer confuses preparation with control. Control relaxes when trust in detection increases. There is often a moment where the system checks for permission to rest fully in this state. Old conditioning may suggest that ease must be temporary or earned. Let that suggestion pass. Ease is not a reward. It is a baseline that re-emerges when unnecessary strain is released. You may find that certain desires feel quieter, not gone, just less insistent. They no longer pull attention forward. This does not mean they will not be met. It means they are no longer driving perception. Desire becomes contextual rather than central. The system prioritizes stability before expansion. There is a clearer boundary between what is yours to carry and what is not. Emotional signals from others register without being absorbed. This boundary is not rigid. It is permeable without being porous. You remain responsive without becoming responsible for what does not belong to you. The observer becomes more precise here. Instead of scanning broadly, it notices fine-grained changes. Small shifts in tone, timing, or internal sensation stand out. This precision is not analytical. It is sensory. The system reads the field the way the body reads balance, without calculation. You might notice that language itself feels slower. Words form with more space between them. Silence becomes comfortable. This is not withdrawal from communication. It is respect for accuracy. Speaking less often can feel like saying more, because what does emerge carries less distortion. There is an increasing sense that you do not need to arrive anywhere. The idea of arrival loses relevance when the present moment is sufficient. This does not eliminate direction. It removes the pressure to finalize identity or purpose. Direction unfolds through engagement, not declaration. If there is a faint curiosity about how long this state will last, notice it without attachment. Duration is not a useful metric here. Coherence does not need to be maintained. It stabilizes itself through repeated, ordinary presence. When fluctuations occur, they do not undo what has integrated. The system continues to demonstrate reliability. Small challenges arise and are met without escalation. Recovery happens quickly. There is less residue. This is how you know something fundamental has shifted, not through intensity, but through resilience without effort. Remain attentive without effort. Let awareness continue to rest where it naturally settles. Nothing needs to be protected. Nothing needs to be accelerated. The signal remains steady, and you remain within it, moving at a pace that does not require explanation. There is a growing familiarity with this steadiness, as if the system recognizes it as something remembered rather than newly acquired. You may sense that this way of being is not an upgrade, but a return. The body responds to it with a quiet relief, like settling into a posture it no longer has to hold deliberately. You might notice how quickly you recover now when something briefly pulls you out of alignment. A sound, a thought, an unexpected interaction. The return happens without commentary. There is no inner reprimand, no need to restore control. The system recenters itself, the way breath finds its own rhythm after a pause. This is where trust deepens, not as a belief, but as a lived pattern. You are no longer monitoring yourself to see if you are doing this correctly. The observer has learned that interference slows integration. Allowing the process to unfold without supervision proves more effective than constant adjustment ever was. There can be a subtle shift in how meaning registers. You may find yourself less inclined to assign significance to every experience, not because nothing matters, but because not everything needs interpretation. Meaning arrives more selectively now, carrying weight without requiring effort. When it does appear, it feels obvious rather than earned. You might sense that identity feels lighter. Roles you once inhabited still exist, but they no longer cling. You can step into them and out of them without residue. This flexibility is not fragmentation. It is stability without fixation. The system remains coherent even as contexts change. There is often a moment where the absence of internal noise reveals how loud the world can be. This does not overwhelm you. It clarifies contrast. You become aware of how much external urgency operates by default, not because it is necessary, but because it is habitual. You are not required to join it. You may notice that your attention naturally gravitates toward what is simple. Complexity loses its allure when it does not serve coherence. This does not reduce intelligence. It refines it. The system learns to distinguish between what is intricate and what is essential. Energy follows the latter. If there is a sense of being slightly ahead of or behind others, let it dissolve. Comparison no longer holds relevance here. Timelines do not synchronize at the same rate for every system. You are not meant to match anyone else's pacing. Alignment happens internally first. There can be an unexpected tenderness toward yourself in this space. Not sentimentality, just an absence of harshness. The internal tone softens when it no longer needs to motivate through pressure. Care becomes a default, not an intervention. This tenderness does not weaken resolve. It stabilizes it. You might find that moments of silence feel full rather than empty. The pause between thoughts becomes a place rather than a gap. This is where subtle detection occurs. Small insights surface without fanfare. They do not demand action. They simply integrate, becoming part of how you move. The observer no longer positions itself as separate from experience. Observation becomes participatory without being entangled. You are inside the process, not watching it from a distance. This dissolves the sense of waiting for something to begin. It already has. If there is a fleeting urge to capture or preserve this state, notice it gently and let it go. Preservation implies fragility. What is integrating now is not fragile. It is robust precisely because it does not rely on effort. Letting it fluctuate strengthens it. There is a growing ease with not having a narrative about where this leads. Direction does not need to be articulated to be followed. The system reads the field moment by moment, adjusting without strain. This responsiveness is more reliable than any plan. You remain grounded in the present without anchoring yourself to it. Presence is not something you hold, it is something you allow. The more it is allowed, the more it permeates ordinary activity, blurring the line between stillness and movement. Stay with the understated continuity of this experience. Let it blend into the next moment without marking a transition. Nothing here needs to be named or concluded. The signal continues at the same volume, and you continue to meet it with the same ease. There is a quiet trust now in how moments assemble themselves. You may notice that situations no longer feel as though they are approaching you from the outside. They arise around you, already contextualized, already readable. This does not come from foresight. It comes from alignment. When internal coherence stabilizes, the environment reflects it without effort. You might sense that reactions occur later than they used to, or not at all. There is a pause where impulse once lived. That pause is not suppression. It is space for accurate response. The system no longer confuses speed with effectiveness. It allows information to complete its arrival before acting. This can feel like a soft deceleration of life itself. Events still happen, but they do not stack. Each experience stands on its own, without being crowded by the next. The timeline stretches just enough to be navigable. You are not falling behind. You are moving at a rate that preserves clarity. There may be moments when you realize how much of your past energy was spent bracing for misunderstanding, for disruption, for the need to adapt quickly. That posture is releasing now. The body no longer assumes impact. It stands available rather than guarded. This availability does not make you vulnerable. It makes you responsive. You may notice that certain patterns simply stop repeating, not because you resolved them, but because the conditions that sustained them are no longer present. Patterns require reinforcement. When attention withdraws its urgency, loops lose momentum. They dissolve quietly, without ceremony. There is often a subtle shift in how you perceive choice. Options feel less charged. Decisions no longer feel like forks that determine identity. They are adjustments in direction, not declarations of self. This lightness reduces the fear of error. Correction becomes natural when stakes are no longer inflated. You might find yourself more comfortable with pauses in conversation, pauses in activity, pauses in thought. These pauses are not gaps to be filled. They are part of the rhythm. Silence becomes collaborative rather than awkward. It carries information without sound. There can be a growing sense that you do not need to manage your inner state. Fluctuations occur and resolve without intervention. Mood shifts pass through without becoming conditions. This does not flatten emotional life, it stabilizes it. Emotion becomes weather rather than climate. You may notice that your attention is less attracted to extremes. Excessive stimulation feels unnecessary. Excessive withdrawal feels equally unnecessary. The system gravitates toward balance without calculating it. This middle range is not compromise. It is efficiency. If there is a brief sense of disorientation, it may come from the absence of familiar tension. When struggle recedes, the nervous system checks for what to do next. Nothing needs to be done. Orientation emerges from stillness, not activity. Give it time. You might become aware of how rarely you think about yourself directly. Self-referential thought loses priority. Experience becomes more immediate, less mediated by commentary. This is not a loss of self-awareness. It is self-awareness without fixation. There is a quieter relationship with expectation. You no longer need moments to confirm anything about you. Validation, success, recognition, all lose their urgency when internal detection is clear. You know where you stand without needing evidence. The observer now operates with less contrast. Instead of oscillating between engagement and withdrawal, it remains steady across situations. This steadiness is not numbness. It is consistency. The system no longer spikes to feel alive. You may notice a subtle gratitude that does not attach to objects or outcomes. It is not directed at anything in particular. It is the body's response to reduced strain. When effort drops, appreciation arises naturally, without needing a reason. There is no need to track how far you have come to be here. Tracking would reintroduce comparison. The process does not require milestones. It unfolds through continuity. Each moment builds on the last without needing acknowledgement. Remain within this understated flow. Let experience continue to organize itself without commentary. The signal remains present, not as something separate from you, but as the rhythm you are already moving with. Nothing is missing. Nothing is ahead. The system continues, balanced and unhurried. There is an increasing sense that you do not need to hold yourself together. The effort to maintain continuity softens, and yet nothing falls apart. This is how the system demonstrates its integrity. Stability does not come from tension. It comes from alignment that no longer requires reinforcement. You may notice that the boundary between inner and outer experience feels less pronounced, not merged, not confused, just less rigid. Sensation, thought, and environment interact without friction. This does not dissolve individuality, it refines it. You are distinct without being separate. There can be moments when something that once felt personal now feels neutral. Old triggers lose their charge, not because they were suppressed, but because the conditions that activated them are no longer present. The system no longer reads threat where there is none. This recalibration happens quietly, without analysis. You might sense that your attention no longer hunts for confirmation. You are not scanning for signs that you are on the right path. The need for validation fades when internal detection becomes reliable. You know when something fits without having to justify it. There is a subtle efficiency in how energy moves now. You may feel less tired, even when activity increases. Fatigue once came from internal conflict more than exertion. When that conflict dissolves, effort becomes cleaner. Rest and action balance themselves without scheduling. You may notice that some questions simply dissolve rather than being answered. They lose relevance. This is not avoidance. It is resolution through irrelevance. When coherence increases, certain inquiries no longer apply. The system stops asking what no longer serves orientation. There can be a growing comfort with ambiguity. Unclear situations no longer provoke immediate resolution. You allow them to remain open without anxiety. This openness gives information time to surface. Clarity arrives when it is complete, not when it is forced. You might find that you are less reactive to shifts in mood or circumstance. Change registers, but it does not destabilize. The system has learned that variation is normal. It does not interpret fluctuation as failure. This resilience is quiet and durable. There is often a moment where you realize you are no longer waiting for permission. Not from others, not from yourself. Action arises when it is appropriate, without inner negotiation. Inaction arises just as naturally when movement is not required. Both feel valid. You may notice that your sense of time continues to soften. Past and future feel less like separate zones and more like contextual information. The present does not feel isolated, it feels sufficient. Planning becomes lighter because it is not compensating for insecurity. There can be an understated sense of belonging that does not depend on place or role. You feel situated without needing to define where you belong. This belonging is internal. It travels with you. It does not need to be protected. You might sense that even silence has texture now. It is not empty. It carries subtle cues. This is where fine-grained perception lives. You notice small shifts in yourself and others without effort. This sensitivity is not overwhelming. It is calibrated. The observer continues to function without dominating experience. It notices without interrupting. This balance allows life to unfold with minimal distortion. You are engaged without being consumed, present without being fixed. There is no need to consolidate this experience into an insight. Insights would imply separation. What is happening now is integration. It does not need to be remembered. It needs to be lived, quietly, repeatedly, until it becomes indistinguishable from ordinary awareness. Stay with this ease as it continues to permeate. Nothing here needs to be intensified or preserved. The system is doing what it does best when it is not being directed. It continues to align, moment by moment, without drawing attention to itself. There is a sense now that the system trusts itself completely, not as a declaration, but as a default. You may notice how little internal checking remains. Experience unfolds and is met without hesitation, without rehearsal. This trust did not arrive suddenly. It formed gradually, through repeated moments of nothing going wrong when control was released. You might feel that your inner landscape has widened. There is more room for experience to move without colliding. Thoughts, emotions, sensations pass through with fewer edges. This spaciousness is not emptiness, it is capacity. The system has increased its tolerance for variability without tightening. There can be a quiet understanding that you are no longer oriented around correction. You are not fixing yourself, refining yourself, or preparing yourself. You are functioning. When adjustment is needed, it happens naturally, without self-reference. The observer no longer frames life as a problem to solve. You may notice that attention rests more often in the body without effort. Sensation feels trustworthy. You do not need to interpret every signal. The body communicates clearly when it is not overridden. This clarity supports action and rest equally, without privileging one over the other. There is often a subtle sense of completion without finality, not an ending, just a settling. Loose threads have tied themselves without being pulled. What remains open feels intentionally open, not unresolved. The system distinguishes between what needs closure and what needs space. You might sense that your relationship to uncertainty has matured. Unknowns do not feel like gaps to be filled. They feel like part of the structure. The quantum field does not reveal everything at once because it does not need to. Partial information is sufficient when coherence is present. You may find that you are less impressed by internal states. Calm, focus, even clarity pass through without being claimed. You do not identify with them. You allow them. This non-attachment does not diminish their value. It makes them sustainable. There can be a subtle dignity in how you move now. Not pride, not confidence, in the usual sense. Just a steadiness that does not require recognition. You take up space without asserting it. You withdraw without disappearing. This balance feels natural, unforced. You might notice that even when discomfort arises, it does not threaten the whole system. It localizes. It passes. There is less fear of regression because there is no longer a sense of progress to lose. Stability is not a peak behind you. It is a capacity within you. There is a quiet intimacy with the present moment that does not feel intense. It feels familiar. You are not leaning into it. You are already inside it. This intimacy does not demand attention. It simply remains available. You may sense that the need for explanation has almost fully dissolved. You do not need to tell yourself why this is happening or what it means. Meaning is embedded in function. When something works, it does not need justification. The observer now operates as part of the system rather than above it. Awareness circulates rather than oversees. This circulation distributes load evenly. Nothing is overburdened. Nothing is neglected. You might notice that your internal tone is neutral in the best sense. Not flat, but balanced. Extremes no longer define experience. This neutrality supports responsiveness without reactivity. It allows you to meet what comes without distortion. There is no anticipation of what follows this moment, not because nothing will happen, but because anticipation is unnecessary. Whatever arises will be met from the same steadiness that is present now. The system has proven its reliability. Remain within this unmarked continuity. There is nothing to transition toward, nothing to conclude. The signal remains constant, and you remain aligned with it, without effort, without commentary, without needing to know what comes next. There is a natural settling now, not into stillness as an event, but into stillness as a background condition. You may notice that nothing in you is leaning forward anymore. Nothing is bracing. Nothing is holding. Experience continues, but it no longer pulls you out of yourself to meet it. You are already present when it arrives. This is not an ending. There is no sense of completion that needs to be acknowledged. What has stabilized does not require recognition to remain intact. It functions quietly, like a system that no longer needs to announce its status. You do not need to remember this state. It will express itself through how you move, how you pause, how you respond without effort. You may notice that attention rests more easily in the body, in the space behind the eyes, in the simple fact of being here. Nothing about this needs to be maintained. Maintenance implies fragility. What is present now is resilient precisely because it is unforced. It does not depend on conditions remaining favorable. There is a sense that you are no longer waiting for life to begin or change shape. Life is already in motion, and you are already inside it, oriented correctly. The absence of urgency does not reduce engagement. It refines it. You meet moments as they are, without projecting weight onto them. You might sense that even when the mind becomes active again, it will not override this baseline. Activity can return without disrupting coherence. Thought can arise without tightening the system. Emotion can move without flooding it. This stability does not exclude intensity. It contextualizes it. There is no need to carry this forward consciously. Carrying would turn it into an object. Let it remain diffuse, integrated, unremarkable. The more ordinary it feels, the more deeply it has settled. Ordinary awareness is where coherence lives long-term. You may notice a quiet permission to simply be as you are, without adjustment. This permission does not come from an external source. It arises from internal alignment. When the system agrees with itself, permission becomes unnecessary. You do not need approval to occupy your own state. There is nothing to take from this moment and nothing to leave behind. The boundary between now and what follows is thin. Continuity remains intact. Whatever the next movement is, it will emerge from the same steadiness, the same clarity, the same absence of strain. You are not being guided towards something else. You are being allowed to remain where you already are. The signal does not fade because it was never separate from you. It was a confirmation, not an instruction. A quiet marking of safety already recognized by the system before words arrived. Let attention soften completely. Let the body settle in whatever way feels natural. Let awareness remain open without searching. Nothing is required of you in this moment. Nothing is expected. The field holds its coherence, and you move within it without effort, without urgency, without the need to name what is happening. This is sufficient.